A traditional lawyer, if you have gone to see a lawyer, just reflect back on your experience with that lawyer. There are three things that we again do. We say, we need to help you in your estate planning about who gets what when you die, hopefully not the government, who manages your affairs if you could not take care of yourself, and would you want a feeding tube if you were in a coma. That's traditional estate planning, and that's what people end up doing. And believe it or not, all these four components are connected, and yet they never get connected till the very last minute. So let me give you an example of what that's all about. So you're sitting at home one day and things are going just fine. And all of a sudden you have a bad headache. And you know this is not a migraine headache that your Tylenol is going to solve. You say, I need to do something about this. This does not feel right. If you have a mate, you call your spouse. If you don't have a mate, you pick up 911. And you call 911 and the paramedics rush in and they say, well, you're having a stroke and we need to take you in. What are the chances today in 2011 that you survived the stroke compared to 40 years ago? Pretty darn good, right? So we start with a health issue, which is a stroke. You get rushed into the hospital saves your life. The doctor says, look, you need to be exercising and eating right. And you need to focus on those issues, but for right now, you're done. Get out of my hospital, but you can't go back home. Where do you get discharged to? A nursing home, rehab center is what they call it, right? You go to a rehab center. Now, you know, true to form, majority of the people when I ask how many of you would be willing to spend even a week of your retirement life in a nursing home, there's hardly ever a hand that goes up. Yet here we are in a rehab center, which is nothing other than a nursing home. But you grin and bear it. Why? Because it's part of medical care. We need to get stronger. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. So you are there. You're there for the first week. Okay, we'll deal with it. The second week, I'll deal with it. The third week, now it starts getting a little old. By the fourth week, you're antsy, and you're telling any and everyone who will give you the time of day, I am ready to get out of here. When do I get out? When do I get out? The reality, the way that it happens is, and the anecdotal example that I have is where this wife came into us at the last minute and said, my husband's at home, in the hospital after his stroke. He wants to come back home. I have no capacity to be able to bring him back home. He is much larger than I am, and if he falls even one time, I will not be able to take care of him. So there's the husband who is all excited about getting back home. Here's the wife all worried about what will happen when he does come back home. I don't have the setup to bring him back home, and the perfect storm is brewing. And the husband calls her up on a Friday morning and says, honey, I got the greatest news for you. And she says, yeah, what? She says, the doctor said I can go home today. And so that's what then brings us down. So this becomes, believe it or not, health under the right condition becomes a big housing issue. And surprisingly, of all the discharges that happen from a hospital to a rehab, research shows that about 70% of those discharges could be accommodated at home. So how is it then we end up in a rehab center? Because somebody said you need to go down to a rehab center to get things taken care of up there. Nobody talks about home health. There are very few people, and it's all about this whole industry that is out there, curing illnesses, who's making money, and how do we do the discharges. So, all right, so you grin and bear the housing issue. Now, who's paying for this housing issue? Medicare, for up to 100 days. And even though you and I might focus on the words 100 days of nursing home care paid for by Medicare, the focus should be on the words up to, because don't be surprised, day 21, 28, 35, 42, someday a nurse shows up and says, you know, you're not making progress anymore and Medicare will no longer cover your bills. So who's going to cover the bills? What are my options? Well, an option is you can go home. And either if you have a spouse, the spouse, in some cases, yeah, you can go back home, everything is set up. In some cases, if the house is not ready to take you back home, the question then becomes, well, can I stay here till we can get the house ready? Sure you can. What will the cost be? Take a guess. What's the cost in a rehab center? Sorry? Thousands, right. Well, let's narrow the thousands down to how many thousands? Any guesses? 6,000. That's a good guess. About 8 to $12,000. And in Seattle, it's about $12,000. In the outlying areas, it's about $10,000 for rehab each month. So it's not an issue that you can say grin and bear it. All of a sudden, this health nightmare becomes a housing issue. Don't want to be where I am stuck where I don't want to be, becomes a financial issue, because at $8,000 or $10,000 a month, you're looking at your state, and modest sized estates are going to say, how the heck do I figure this stuff out? And then somebody at the rehab center says, have you looked at the VA? Are you a veteran? Yes, I am. Have you looked at the VA benefits? Well, what VA benefits? Have you looked at Medicaid? What do you mean Medicaid? I mean, I'm not broke. I can't get Medicaid. And all of a sudden you find out that this financial issue, which comes from a medical issue, becomes a legal issue, because you can neither get to VA nor can you get to Medicaid until you rearrange your entire estate. Much like if you have enough money and you pass away, you end up paying the IRS a certain amount of money by way of estate taxes, unless you do some planning. So that's legal planning that you end up doing. And the same way you find out that this with some legal planning, you can protect your assets. With some counsel from the health world, you could be in your own home if that's where you want to be. So all these things are connected. And when I have been looking at all of this stuff, I keep saying, how come we don't ever connect it to begin with?